success of an entrepreneur.
We've raised the bar.
Learn firsthand from successful business owners and create your own path to success.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
It's time to hit the road to growth with team lead of the Enriquez Group, Realtor Vinny.
Hi, you Roach Growth listeners. Today I have David Steele, and you know what? It's really great when you get to have a little bit of talk with the guest before the episode, because there's probably little nuggets that I didn't even know. I probably missed it with a PR company, but he's just not just a wealth advisor, the CEO, co-founder of One Wealth Advisors, but also started some restaurants. And anyone listening that's been a part of the restaurant business knows that's a difficult thing. So it'll be interesting to kind of get in a different perspective of helping people kind of grow their wealth, but also helping the nitty gritty of building a restaurant business. So thank you, David, for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, I mean, I know you have multiple hats, right? And I love having guests that multiple hats because they look at different things in different perspective. So if you're having kind of dialogue with someone someone's never met you before, what kind of conversation do you kind of start with? How do you describe kind of what you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, I guess?
I love the question, actually, because people want quick solutions in business. I'm very skeptical of anything that succeeds quickly. I highly doubt it's sustainable. There's, in my mind, two fundamental aspects to succeeding as an entrepreneur. One of them, most importantly, is developing a systematic model for your efforts. You're in real estate. It's one client at a time.
Yeah. And
it's more importantly, more specifically, is one relationship at a time. And eventually, hopefully you get referred left and right as you build your practice. Every business has a systematic model you can create where you celebrate the behavior every day of the system rather than celebrating wins and losses. So in your business in real estate, if a transaction happens, to me, that's not something to get excited about. What you should get excited about is, did you do your job every day? Because inevitably it's going to lead to transactions in the future. So whether, my three main businesses that I've started, two are restaurant companies, and one is a financial planning company. The commonality across them is we've ingrained this idea that we're not going to celebrate wins and losses. We're going to celebrate systematic behaviors that we've developed.
I love what you said right there, because I actually, I heard someone on stage say that maybe like 5-6 years ago, something similar to that, where they said a good realtor focuses on the transaction, a great realtor focuses on the systems, right? So if you have an issue in the process, yes, you want to fix the escrow, but you also want to fix the system so you don't have the issue coming again in the future. So I love you say that, because I don't say that enough to people. So I appreciate that, David.
It's really challenging emotionally. I mean, the number of people that I observe get excited when good things happen and bummed out when bad things happen on a daily basis. It's just astonishing. The emotional volatility that people feel from those responses to those outcomes are, uncontrollable. You don't control those, whereas you do control if you rolled your sleeves up and got to work every day and got excited about completing the system every day.
Well, something I was talking about with someone else, where it's like, it's easier to fix a system than it is to fix yourself, right? I mean, so, okay, we had an issue here. Okay, how can we fix this? Take it to the next step. So no, it's any business owner right there. I mean, if you're just listening right now, I think you probably got enough, but we're going to get into a lot more. So David, walk us through. So where did you grow up? I mean, was your plan always to own businesses?
No, I grew up poor in South Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. And started working as a dishwasher the minute I can get a job at age 16. And I stayed in the kitchen for a little while, did a little bit of prep cook and what's called garde manger, which is salads and stuff like that. And then I saw the busboys and servers working half the hours, making twice the money. And I said, I'm going to move to the front of the house. So I moved to the front of the house, became a busboy and a server, and eventually a captain in a very fancy restaurant, and eventually a manager all the way up from 16 to 24. But it was pretty traumatic growing up poor. It really was difficult. So I went to the university library when those existed. They probably still exist, but I don't think people have to look for books there. But I looked for a book, and I looked for the highest paying job for a 4-year degree, with only a 4-year degree. And it said stockbroker. My passion was restaurants. I wanted to open a restaurant or at least grow in that industry. But I saw a bunch of artisans, chefs, namely, who I instinctively knew weren't really applying logical business principles to how they ran their businesses. And none of them were flourishing. They were all struggling to some degree, even the quote unquote successful ones. So I went to work on Wall Street as a stockbroker and made money, was miserable, almost left the industry because I realized that I wasn't really, in my mind, adding value to people's lives. I was a parasite, just selling them products. And instead of leaving the business, I researched how I could stay in financial services and feel like I was adding value to people's lives. And this idea of financial planning, fee-based financial planning came up, which is much less upside earnings potential, certainly less quickly upside earnings potential, but made me feel really good every day. And I took a 75% pay cut to convert from a stockbroker to a financial planning like practice, but I was never happier. And my brother joined me, and he and I, one client at a time, built a financial planning practice. We now have a 12-person company with 380 clients and $1 billion in assets under management. So 30 years later, it looks like an overnight success, but it was very much one client at a time. Anyhow, I finally, after only doing that for 15 years and feeling confident, comfortable, I said to my brother, hey, I got to scratch this itch. I got to open this restaurant. I'd written this business plan for a restaurant. I said, I got to do it. And he said, yeah, go for it. And I put a team together and opened my first restaurant in San Francisco 16 years ago. And it ended up being one of the most successful restaurants, I think, in the history of San Francisco. It's called Flour and Water. So people outside of the city are like, what's the name? It's the ingredients for dough, so pizza and pasta, but it's sort of like a gastronomic pizza and pasta spot. Anyway, that's turned into 2 restaurant companies with 7 restaurants and 3 more opening this year, and a whole consumer packaged goods business. And anyhow, that's how I got to where I am. And now I'm doing both financial services and restaurants.
So 15 years in the business, and you said you finally felt comfortable to, guess, scratch the itch. Was it comfortable at the level that you had enough money saved away, or you had a strong enough system in place or team members that could actually bring in the income so you could go on this other, I guess, project? Or what does that look like?
It's a great question, actually, really great question. No, I did not have enough money saved, but I did have a lot of confidence in my brother, who was my partner, and we had a couple of people working for us, and we had like we talked about earlier, systems in place where I knew that my income, even if I was sacrificing a lot of growth in income, I knew that my income would be sustainable, because we also had converted, when I converted from a stockbroker to a financial planning like practice, we became fee-based, which is there was an annual fee we were charging clients rather than a transaction for commissions for transactions, which then meant we had really sticky, reliable, albeit less revenue, but sticky and reliable revenue. And so, yeah, it was me basically saying, I'm making enough money to be happy, which, by the way, I think that number is probably a smaller amount than most listeners would imagine. And as a financial planner, I'm here to tell you, making as much as you can doesn't make you happier, and that's another conversation. But anyhow, yeah, I had the confidence that my income would sustain at least.
At that time, did you have like significant others in your life, or was it mostly you that you kind of had to worry about with kind of making that jump?
Great question. Another great question. I never wanted kids, nor did I ever really want to get married, but I did have a partner at the time. Just prior to opening the restaurant, I was with a woman for 10 years, and she had worked in restaurants and wouldn't let me open my restaurant. So there's a reason I waited 15 years instead of maybe 10 to open that first restaurant. And that's because my ex was really anxious that I was going to be working at the restaurant. And I had a vision in my mind where I'd put a team together and I'd be much more involved in strategy and business rather than operating, if you will. And I had confidence in that. She didn't. We broke up, and a year later I opened my first restaurant. So I was single, no obligations and responsibilities, which, I had to actually sell my apartment to come up with half the capital for my first restaurant, because I was trying to raise money from investors, but it was 2009, right after the credit crisis or during the credit crisis, and nobody would write a check to some finance guy trying to open his first restaurant. And I raised half the money from friends and the other half I put up myself. And I couldn't have done that if I had people depending on me.
And everything worked out. Well, it seems like everything worked out for you in that transition. If someone's listening right now and maybe they don't have the full backing of their partner in making a jump like that, is there perspective or thoughts that you maybe could provide for that listener?
Yeah, I don't think everybody's going to like my answer, but if you make the choice, I emphasize word choice, to have dependence in your life, and you make choices to have obligations such as a mortgage or high rent or kids' education or whatever it may be, you have in fact possibly given up the choice to be an entrepreneur. To be an entrepreneur requires, in my opinion, the ability for the worst to happen, not to bury you, because the worst usually happens in the beginning. And if you are not able to suffer for a period of time because of the infrastructure of your life, you probably should just keep a steady job and have some side hustles that keep your mental itches scratched. But I think you should be. Now, my story is interesting in that I didn't abandon my steady paycheck, if you will, for my entrepreneurial pursuit. And I do support that. I think, in fact, in my financial planning business, we do what we call financial life planning. And the reason we add that word life to it is because the overwhelming majority of the things we talk about with our clients are much more related to, frankly, psychoanalysis than hardcore finance technical stuff. And we talk to clients a lot about why do they want to do what they say they want to do, or what are their goals, and let's unpack this. And I do think an entrepreneur can't help but be an entrepreneur. It's in their DNA, and it would be a darn shame if somebody wasn't able to pursue that, because that's their true calling. And an entrepreneur is a leader who can organize groups of people, even if it's a small business, and maybe small groups of people. If it's eventually a large business, large groups of people. An entrepreneur is somebody who can organize groups of people, coalesce them around an idea, a vision, and build systems and processes and take your time. I was able to do that both in financial planning, my day job, my steady paycheck, if you will, but then in restaurants, because and I was able to do both. And so I am. I think that's probably that lack of binary thinking, which I would say, which is I didn't say I had to do one or the other. I was able to do both. That is an option for people as well.
Was the the knowledge that you built in that 15-year business, or not did it, but how did it help you start that restaurant, in like the hiring, HR, things like that? Were there perspectives you took away?
Vinny, you're asking some great questions, man. That's a really great question. I think, to the extent that my role in the restaurant world that I'm now in is adding value to the organizational development, and was out of the gates 16 years ago when we opened our first restaurant. It's possibly because I learned through osmosis from my clients, watching them succeed and fail at their business endeavors. And I was given the ability to I guess it was almost like going to school for entrepreneurship. But I didn't realize that until I reflected upon it. I didn't realize that all of the learnings I accumulated from my experience working with clients in financial life planning would apply to restaurants. Never did I dream that was the case. I now think upon reflection that it probably applies to business in general and maybe even organizations in general.
Was how much synergy was from the financial business to the restaurant business? Were you like cherry picking like people that had restaurants going, hey, you have a chef or someone I could talk
No,
to about nothing like that? Okay.
no, I really left when I opened my first restaurant. At the time I had two partners, front of the house sort of general manager type person and an amazing chef. And I really did leave the operational details like that to those guys. They were the experts. I had a lot of confidence in my ability to have written a good, solid business plan and to raise the capital from investors. Well, me being half the money and my friends being the other half, but lease negotiations, legal, developing systems around financial reporting and financial discipline, things like requiring recipe costing, and all the stuff that I observed when I worked in restaurants was not actually happening. That just instinctively I knew should happen. But so I was way more involved in systems that I suppose I possibly brought over from financial planning into restaurants, but I didn't do it. There was no symbiosis, if you will, in terms of labor pools or anything like that. Now, as it turns out, operating restaurants is exciting to a lot of people. I end up talking more about that side of my business, even though I spend only 25% of my time in restaurants and 75% probably on financial planning. What's ended up happening is there's been a magnetism, I suppose, because of my role in the restaurant world, attracting clients to the financial planning company. I guess people are like, oh, this guy's kind of cool. Oh, that's interesting. Let's learn more about him. So, and my network also ballooned with the restaurant world, which meant I was meeting more people to potentially become clients of the financial planning company. So out of the gate, there was no symbiosis, but over time, there's been some.
The hiring process and finding the right people is always kind of an intriguing thought to me, right? And some people kind of almost have, and that I've talked to, have their like Rolodex, have their people like lined up if they're going to do this thing. Other people, when they know they have this thing, they're going to basically find the right people to do it. For yourself, because you put so much faith in the general manager, and I think it was a chef or something that you talked about.
Yeah.
Did you already have them in your circle of people, or is it like, okay?
No,
How do you find them?
I spent over a year after writing the business plan for the restaurant. I spent over a year looking for them. Entrepreneurs will always stay small, which there's nothing wrong with small, but if there's a desire to grow, and the name of this podcast is Road to Growth, entrepreneurs will always stay smaller than they could if they don't learn the power of I'm going to use the word delegation. I don't love that word because the implication is hierarchical. What I would prefer to think of it as more as if you can empower somebody who's junior to you with ever increasingly less menial tasks, but very menial tasks to begin with. And the more you can train them, empower them with those menial tasks, and the more you can continue to invest in them to have them do ever increasingly less menial tasks and more meaningful tasks over time, the more you'll be able to be scaling yourself. So, my financial planning company is a team of 12. Well, it ain't JP Morgan, which is a team of thousands and thousands and thousands. And the CEO of that company, Jamie Dimon, he has scaled himself. So it's not like I'm saying I'm a master at scaling, but I am confident that to scale yourself means you have to empower others with taking over parts of what the business does.
Looking back at, I guess, your career in building the restaurants, building your wealth business, can you look at or think of mistakes that you've basically made and kind of learned from?
Well, the financial planning practice, early on, when you first start a business, um, it's really when you really need money to survive.
Hmm.
Um, it's nearly impossible, maybe even impossible, to say no to bad business and to only say yes to the right business. It's probably hard to know what the right business is. I had mentioned earlier, I started as a stockbroker, pivoted to financial planning. Most listeners possibly don't even know what the difference is. And one is a investment salesperson that gets a commission to sell people investment products. The other is a fee-based, often fiduciary advisor that charges a lot less money. It charges nothing per transaction, and cumulatively, it's probably a lot less money the client is paying. And when I first made that transition, I was still saying yes to stockbroker business.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe I said yes to financial planning business that weren't the right, I knew the clients weren't the right clients, wasn't a right fit. But, trying to pay my rent, survive. Same thing with restaurants. I mean, just because, I don't want to go to a restaurant that serves sushi and pizza,
Hmm.
even if the customer asks for sushi at a pizza restaurant. The restaurant probably should stick to its guns. That's an oversimplified example.
Yeah.
But I guess my takeaway is develop a business plan, know your authentic offering that's true to what you're trying to accomplish, and try to be disciplined and stick with it, and cut your personal financial needs down as low as you can when you're starting. So that way you're not forced to take business that you otherwise would turn away.
So in your perspective, I mean, I understand having your path, right, of where you want to take your business, and how much runway do you give the client to kind of help guide you on your path towards that location? I mean, is there any, or is it, I mean, 80% basically your path and maybe 20% the customer, or is it not even that? Does that make sense? Question.
Yeah, well, listen. At the end of the day, all business is about the customer,
Yeah.
and so you have to listen to your customer. And if your customer is asking for something that feels, that just doesn't make sense to you logically,
Yeah.
you probably shouldn't do it. But if it makes sense to you logically, the question is, why wouldn't you then have that become part of your core offering for every client?
Mm.
If it's a sensible evolution to your offering. So that's an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is somebody who takes in all this information and distills it down to a business model that is optimal for their intent, which does involve customer listening to the customer, I think. But on the other hand, I think deep down we know if there's quote unquote bad business that you're saying yes to that is in. I mean, we had a person join our financial planning company, a very close friend of mine. And we had started the company a long time ago, but he joined us, I don't know, 8-10 years ago or something. And when he joined us, he was sort of surprised by the the uh, the discipline we had about how we did business and who we did business with, how systematic we were. And he very much, when he brought his clients over to the company, there were a certain number of clients where we just said, I don't think we should work with that client. And there were one or two of them that were very high paying clients, but the type of services they were asking for, demanding, requiring, were totally inconsistent with our offering. And it just meant that we were either exposed risk-wise or spending way too much time building systems and processes for a small number of clients that just didn't make sense. So, but that's a privileged position to be in. We were many, many years into our business where we had a foundation of revenue and profitability where we could give up a little bit of incremental extra profitability at that moment in time in the name of sticking to our guns.
Makes sense. If we were talking in 5 years from now, do you kind of have a location of where you want to be? Is it starting another business? Is it starting
You
expanding?
know,
Or
I'm in my late 50s, and I'm in one of the more luxurious positions a human can be in, which is to say I don't have any more goals I'm trying to achieve, except one goal, which is I want to help other people achieve their goals. And so I actually have two restaurant companies. There's one in San Francisco that is ultimately going to be a national brand, a national company, and one in Tahoe where I live part-time, where I moved the chef up and we opened some restaurants up there, and they're actually separate companies. And there's two chefs at different stages of their careers. One is Chef Tom, who was 24 when I hired him back in, I don't know, it was 2009. He's now CEO of what's called Flower and Water Hospitality Group, and he's 40 and he's starting to flourish in that role. And my role in that restaurant company, has 250 employees. It's a big company. I'm executive chairman. In my mind, I'm trying to help Tom and the rest of that team achieve their life goals. Same thing with Chef Brandon and my Tahoe business. I'm trying to help him achieve his goals. And in my financial planning business, I have, my brother and I probably make as much money as is required to be happy, but not everybody on my team does. Everybody in my team has not achieved their goals. So what I want to be doing in a year and 5 years and until the day I die is helping other people achieve their goals.
If there's a young up and comer that's looking to be a part of your circle, are you hiring? And if you are hiring in the future, what's the best way of them getting more information, I guess?
No, I'm not hiring. And, we've done a bit of soul searching in my financial planning company over the last year or two. We grew pretty dramatically going into COVID and just after COVID. And we responded to that by having a flurry of hires. And we went from, 8 employees to 12 employees or 7 employees to 12 employees. And we woke up one day and said, whoa, wait a second. This is turning into like a real company now, not a partnership or a small practice. How does that feel? And we realized it didn't feel all that great, frankly. I mean, we love it, but we want to protect it, what it is, and not have it become something it's not. So my guess is going forward, we're actually going to be not hiring very frequently. And even if it means we have to grow the business slower, we want to keep it small and very familial. With the restaurant company, we're always hiring, but I'm not sure any listeners want to come in and be servers or line cooks. but we're always hiring in that business. We're not hiring part of the executive team.
You gotta always start somewhere. So if you're maybe high school or something like that, and you want a side gig, something to think about. If I guess people are looking to just get more information or follow your journey, anything like that, of what's coming up, what's the best way of them following that?
I have a silly little website that I created. It's davidsteele.xyz, davidsteele.xyz. That I try to update that somewhat regularly. That has all my weird side stuff I do. I'm on boards of other interesting companies, music industry stuff, restaurant industry stuff. So I added on there. My financial planning company is onewealth.net. And I update my LinkedIn profile pretty regularly as well. So.
David, I appreciate you being on the podcast. I'm going to just finish off with, one last question. Is there, any thoughts, encouragement, feedback you would give to that young busboy when you first got into the business?
I keep your costs as low. If you're an entrepreneur, if it's in your DNA to start your own thing, which careful what you ask for, it really means every day you're worried about other people and their satisfaction and happiness. That's 95% of my time is spent worrying about other people's satisfaction and happiness, which I love. But that really is at the end of the day what being an entrepreneur is. If that's your path, by the way, if that's not your path, don't be ashamed. Like 99% of the world probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur. They probably want the systems and processes you're supposed to do to make your paycheck told to you, dictated to you, rather than you having to dictate it to others. But if you are intending to be if it's your true calling to be an entrepreneur, keep your damn costs down.
Mm.
Don't just keep your costs as low as you possibly can. If you are warm and dry and have shelter and fed, you get to focus on building a business the right way. That's it. And make sure you're loved and make sure you take care of your body. And maybe I, out of the gate, didn't keep my costs down, and it caused me a lot more stress and volatility in my life than if I would have just taken it lower and slower back then.
Well, I mean, at least from what I've seen, as you get success, you start seeing more shiny objects, and those costs can jump fairly quick. So you got to be careful.
Yeah. And our society is not doing us any favors with giving us this constant messaging of if we acquire this thing or we go to this place or we drive this car, or whatever it is that the people that are doing that are happier, and so I should do that. Yeah, listen, I like eating at nice restaurants. I own some nice restaurants. I like staying in a nice hotel room, but not incrementally in such a huge way that it's worth stressing myself out about having to make a nut every month.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, thank you, David, for being here. There's a lot of key takeaways. Structure systems. For any business owner, out there. If you've had your passion, just like David talked about, if you've listened to the whole podcast, 15 years, he basically had that passion inside him for opening the restaurants, and he finally found the opportunity to do it. Right? He had faith, he had goals, he had plans. So, find out what your plan is, find what your goal is, find what your want is, and just work towards it. Thank you guys for listening. Please subscribe, please share, go in the show notes, and go find David. Bye, everyone.